Welcome back to another titillating episode of Killer Bites. I'm Brandy, here as your tour guide into this week's tale of greed, deceit, conspiracy, and you guessed it, murder. Today we investigate the murder of 19-year-old aspiring artist Sarah Stern from Neptune City, New Jersey. In 2016, Sarah went missing, perplexing investigators and her community when they found her car abandoned on a bridge near her hometown. The mystery would slowly be unraveled when a former classmate from her high school would come forward with a shocking lead. A robbery turned sinister. But how and why? Although her body was never found, the case charged forward with full speed. Let's dive in. Sarah was, as her father described, a miracle baby. Michael and her mother, Carla, didn't think she could have children, so when Sarah arrived, it was bliss. She was said to be a bright and happy person. She had lots of friends and was liked by everyone in her town. When Sarah was 15, sadly, her mother died after a battle with cancer. Although it was extremely difficult, she persevered by reaching out to family, friends, her dog Buddy, and immersed herself in her passion for art. She was a natural drawer, painter, and worked with mixed multimedia. She was a graduate of the town's high school and attended Brookdale Community College, where she studied arts and TV production. She began going to art shows and conferences. Sarah made regular trips to conventions like Comic-Con and Buffer, and communicated regularly with social media stars. One such trip took her to Toronto, where she fell in love with the city and told her dad that's where she wanted to move and pursue her passion. In the early morning of December 3rd, 2016, an Uber driver reported an abandoned car on the side of a bridge over the Shark River on Route 35 in Belmar, near the small, tight-knit town of Neptune City, New Jersey, on the northern coast of the state. Officers found the car unlocked and with the keys in the ignition. When they ran the plates, they found it was registered to a 96-year-old local resident, Lillian Stern. Lillian hadn't driven the car for some time and had instead lent it to her granddaughter, Sarah. Police called Sarah's dad, Michael Stern, who was on vacation in Disney World at the time with his wife, Christine. He immediately became worried and left the trip promptly to make the 1,000-mile drive back home to New Jersey. In this small town, the authorities wasted no time trying to track down Sarah. Although it was the middle of the night, the police began to question neighbors and went to Sarah's friend, McAtasney's home, as it was reported the two were together earlier in the day before she went missing. A neighbor reported that she thought Sarah had seemed depressed when she had seen her earlier that day. This sentiment was reiterated by McAtasney during a later police questioning that was recorded outside of his home. He said she struggled with self-destructive, suicidal tendencies. Important to remember for later. While still driving, Michael alerted other family members of Sarah's disappearance. She wasn't responding to any texts or calls, which worried everyone because she was usually glued to her phone. The extended family gathered at Michael's home, thinking the worst. Had she left for Toronto without telling anyone? Or worse, jumped off the bridge? Or was something else afoot? These questions would go unanswered for months to come. The next morning, investigators started searching the river, as the possibility of her having jumped or fallen off the bridge was all they had to go off of at that point. That day, they worked diligently to piece together video footage that tracked Sarah's last day, December 2nd, before she went missing. A neighbor's security camera saw her dropping off a box of her stuff at her neighbor's house midday. Security cam footage later saw her driving through a Taco Bell with their friend Liam around 2 p.m., then going into her local bank afterwards. The bank manager recounted that she seemed happy and friendly, her normal self. As it was a tight-knit community, he knew her as she had been using this bank for some time. After the bank, no further video records of her were found. That is the last time her image would ever be seen. Investigators went through the contents of the box she had left at her neighbor's, which revealed nothing to lead them any further. Days of scouring the river and shoreline found nothing. The family even organized a huge search where hundreds of people came through to help scour the beach and lend support. People from other states were in attendance to help. Looking along the coastline and river, hundreds of people showed up. It spread out across 11 beach towns, combing a stretch of the Jersey Shore. This search became one of the biggest in Jersey Shore history. Unfortunately, the community search turned up nothing as well. As news of her disappearance spread, a couple of well-known YouTube personalities, Julian Solomita and Jenna Marbles, posted videos asking for help. Sarah had met some of them at conventions she had previously attended. A neighbor and childhood friend of Sarah's, Carly, told police that the day Sarah had come over to drop off some belongings, she had told Carly that she had found a large sum of money at her family's second home and stashed the money in a safety deposit box at her bank. For Sarah, it seemed like this was her ticket out, having the means to move to Canada like she had been planning. But when investigators found out about this, they were perplexed. Why then would she leave the money in her safety deposit box if she had indeed ran away? Because they found around $25,000 when they checked her bank, and her passport was still in her room at home. How could she even get across the border? And why leave these key things behind if she planned to escape to Toronto? Her father knew nothing of this money. He said his late wife must have stashed it before she died, saving it for Sarah, but never mentioning it to him before her passing. After a few months, with no leads at all, coverage of her disappearance faded, and authorities remained baffled. They believed the possibility of her having run away seemed very slim at this point. Yet her family and friends continued looking, posting flyers, her father asking for any information about her whereabouts on the news, but to no avail. Then, 2 months after her disappearance, the case finally took a turn. Anthony Curry, a high school classmate of Sarah's, who was living in Brooklyn pursuing a career in filmmaking, called his father back in Neptune City for some advice on a strange story he'd recently heard. Once he spoke to his father, he called local detectives right away. Here's what Curry told them. Curry recalled an encounter with another mutual high school friend while he was home during Thanksgiving that November. The classmate told him an eerie story, saying he had a plan to rob Sarah of her money, strangle her, and throw her off a bridge. I guess hearing a detailed description of a planned murder was normal for horror filmmaker Curry because he dismissed it, not thinking it could really be serious. He said this friend would often feed him horror film ideas given his line of work, and didn't make the connection at first. Until, that is, he saw on social media that Sarah's car had been abandoned and she was missing. He then remembered a Snapchat message from this friend who spoke of the murder plot from a few months back, asking him if the police had spoken to him and wanting to talk to him in person because he couldn't do it over the phone. When Curry spoke to the police, they found his story credible and enlisted him to work with them to go undercover. They devised a sting for Curry to ask his friend if he could borrow some money to replace one of his broken cameras. When Curry reached out to the friend about borrowing some money, he didn't want to talk about it over the phone and agreed to meet him in person. Before they met up, the cops had video wired Curry's car to record their conversation, and what was said shocked and nauseated the police. Leah McAtasney, Sarah's friend we mentioned earlier and who had been with her the day before she went missing, confessed to Curry the scheme and details of him and his accomplice, Sarah's junior prom date and friend, Preston Taylor, killing her and tossing her body over the bridge into the Snake River. Neither man, who were roommates at the time, had any sort of criminal record. Both guys were working and attending college classes. A New York Times article published in March 2017 said that classmates and friends who knew Taylor and McAtasney in high school described them as jokesters. They enjoyed having a good time, like most high school students, drinking and occasionally smoking. It went on to say McAtasney was also a talented trumpet player who learned instruments quickly while in marching band. The article mentioned that Taylor was described as a carefree kid who surfed from time to time and was interested in skateboarding, according to an uncle. McAtasney had been a helpful and obliging community member during the initial weeks of interviews and searches for Sarah. He even listed Sarah under family on his Facebook profile. McAtasney spoke to the police multiple times before his arrest and was even on the local news during the community search party for Sarah, saying in this news clip that she was strong and they hoped she turned up soon. During an interview with McAtasney on December 6th, before he was ever a suspect, police were struck by a question he asked them. Quote, "If she had jumped, would her body be out to the ocean by now?" Curious detail to question when police hadn't brought up anything around that subject. McAtasney also relayed that Sarah had told him about a large, undetermined sum of money that she had found that her mom had left her. He emphasized Sarah's rocky relationship with her dad, mentioning that she was not on the best terms with him. Preston Taylor mentioned the same thing and said he thought she had jumped off the bridge in his initial interview with police on December 7th. In initial interviews, Taylor and McAtasney were the only ones to bring this up. There were a few other discrepancies in hindsight about his interview. For example, the night when Sarah's abandoned car was discovered and the police came to their house, Taylor said he didn't really remember why the police had stopped by, only that McAtasney said Sarah was missing and he was the last person seen with her. He asked McAtasney no further questions and expressed no sense of alarm, having just found out his friend was missing. Back to the car confession. In the video, McAtasney told Curry he timed the killing with an app on his cell phone and that it took him a half hour to choke Stern to death while the victim's dog sat and watched. He said he choked Stern in her home, stuffed a t-shirt down her throat so she wouldn't vomit, and held his finger over her nose until she died. McAtasney on the videotape lamented to Curry that the money he killed Stern for, which she had found in a shoebox in a house her family owns in Avon, New Jersey, was in bills that were of such poor quality he couldn't use them or deposit them in the bank, so he buried the cash. Investigators later found it in the exact spot he mentioned when Taylor later directed them to the precise location as part of his plea bargain. McAtasney told Curry he went to work at a local restaurant after killing Sarah and returned to her house later that night to get rid of her body with Taylor's help. While McAtasney was still at work, Taylor had dragged Sarah's body outside and hid her in the bushes in her family's backyard. When McAtasney arrived, the two men continued the plan to dispose of her body. McAtasney said he placed Sarah in the passenger seat of her car and drove it to the bridge, with Taylor following in a second car he referred to as the, quote, escape car. On the bridge, McAtasney said he needed Taylor's help to throw Stern's body over, not knowing the weight of a dead body would feel like lead. The worst part is, we threw her off the bridge and the body never showed up, McAtasney told Curry in this direct quote from the secretly recorded video. Megan McAtasney, mother of Liam, said her son and his twin brother, Seamus, first met Sarah during Sunday school classes when they were about 6 years old. They became friends in middle school. There was just an instant connection, she recalled in an abcnews.com article in March 2019. Megan stated they had a nickname for their group called the Squad, and the Squad would always come up with the weekend plans. And then the moms would try to figure out how we were going to get the Squad to all of their weekend plans, whether it was Six Flags or the movies or whatever adventure they had decided they're doing that weekend. Megan McAtasney said Liam was close with Sarah and his family was there for her when Sarah's mother died in 2013. She believes deep down that her son could not and did not commit this atrocious crime. On February 1st, 2017, the day after Curry and McAtasney's recorded car conversation, 2 months after Sarah went missing, McAtasney and Taylor were arrested. During this round of individual police questioning, McAtasney refused to talk to the police, but Taylor admitted to the whole thing. He said McAtasney's why was money, and that it was premeditated, first telling Taylor of his idea about a month before the murder occurred. He told them they used walkie-talkies so no information could be tracked through their cell phones while driving to dump her body off of the bridge. Those were later found in McAtasney's possession. The convictions, secured by Assistant Monmouth County prosecutors Christopher Decker and Megan Doyle, resulted from a jury trial that spotlighted the startling plot by McAtasney and Taylor to kill Sarah for her money, dispose of her body, and stage her car on the Route 35 bridge to make it look like she committed suicide. Taylor took a plea deal with authorities, pleading guilty to his charges. He completely complied with police, walking them through the locations where Sarah was killed, how he dragged out of her house and hid her in the bushes, their route to the bridge, and where they dumped her. In his confession to the police, Taylor had mentioned the cash being buried in safes in the park. The key to the box was found on McAtasney's keychain. As a result, Taylor received a reduced sentence for his involvement in helping McAtasney cover up his crime. When Taylor testified against McAtasney, he reported that they stood to gain $50,000 to $100,000 by robbing and killing Stern, but in reality, the robbery only netted them around $10,000. Taylor said his share of the proceeds were $3,000, but the money was in old bills that were in such disrepair they were useless. The trial lasted about 8 weeks, and by most accounts was difficult for all parties involved. Before a decision was made by the jury, Stern read an emotional victim's impact statement to the court, reported NBCNewYork.com on June 21, 2019, saying that his, quote, spirit was broken. He went on to read, "Since the day my daughter went missing, I've had horrific dreams and nightmares. I've been unable to get meaningful sleep since Sarah went missing. Many days I can't function at all. I was devastated and numb from shock the day I learned from detectives Sarah was murdered. I've had horrific dreams and nightmares." He said, "The horrid act of what happened to her body haunts me every day. I will never be able to hug Sarah again." McAtasney looked down almost the entire time the victim's father spoke. He couldn't bring himself to look at the father for the duration of the trial, but was seen lifting his head just for a second to look at the sadness on the face of the man whose daughter he killed before the verdict was announced. The prosecutor said that if New Jersey had a death penalty, he would have pursued it against McAtasney, who he called one of the most heinous killers in Monmouth County history. When the verdict was handed down, guilty on all charges, trial prosecutor Decker said in a quote from NBCNewYork.com, "When you're asking a group of 12 people to convict someone, especially so young, of a crime like murder, it's not an easy thing to do." You could obviously see that from the jury's reaction on the way out, but I think ultimately, at the end of the day, justice was served.